All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and kind of kick it off. I'm sure we'll still have a few. I just saw a note from a few folks that they're clicking in. But in the meantime, I'm going to kick it off for folks and just show, as we're talking today about our Colombia report, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows how to get access to that if you don't already have it. So just for anybody who isn't aware, if you go to the Prospector portal website or Prospector website, prospectorportal.com, and you'll probably get a little pop-up about it, but you can also go to the Colombia report right here. All you have to do is fill out your name and email and click that little button and click download, and you'll get the report. And also, as we're talking through all of the data, Alessandra is going to show you how in Prospector to zero in on Colombia and see all of the companies and projects we're talking about. If you don't already have a Prospector account, you can sign up for a free trial by clicking this Start Trial button right at the top. And same kind of thing, you're just going to fill out your information and we'll send you over a trial account and password, and that way you'll be able to access everything. As we're going through all of this, since you registered for the webinar, afterwards, we will send you the recording of the webinar, as well as for those of you who are listening afterwards, hi, because everyone who registered will get it even if they couldn't join live. But in that email, we'll also ask you if you'd like us to load into your Prospector account the list of all the projects we cover in Colombia. So just when you see that email come through, if you want access to the list that Alessandra is going to show you, just make sure that you click the button in the follow-up email that's going to come, and we can automatically load that list into your My Prospector account. So feel free. I know that's a lot to dump on you right as you're jumping on, but if you've got any questions afterwards, can definitely cover that. The way we're going to kind of run it today, I'm going to go and we're going to do some introductions so you know who all is here on the webinar talking today, and then Alessandra is going to take us through the Prospector data that's in the Colombia report, and then Jason and Mark are going to talk through the Global Scout content, which we're really excited to share with you. And then starting at around around 11:30 or so Eastern, we'll start to do Q&A. So feel free to put questions in the Q&A as we're going through the data. Unless it's like something that has to be addressed really urgently as the speaker is talking, I'll hold all of those until we get to the Q&A section. But I'm sorry, around we'll do Q&A we'll give about 15 minutes for that. But feel free to send them as we're talking through stuff, and that way I can tee everything up for the speakers afterwards. And yeah, and we're really excited to have all of you on. It looks like we've got folks from all over the world tuning in, so we're really happy to have you here. So with that, I'll kick it off for a round of introductions. Alessandra, if you want to go first.
All right. So my name is Alessandra. I'm the data prospector. I have about 12 years working for the mining industry, specifically for the mining industry in Latin America. Most of my experience is in finance and economic, and I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Thanks.
All right.
I think Jason?
Sure. So Jason Cherish, I'm a co-founder of Global Scout. I'm a president, and about 15 years experience in the private, call it risk intelligence space. A lot of that time spent in Africa in the field, supporting mining companies, in addition to other multinationals that are trying to do work in complicated places, seeing a lot more work these days in Latin America.
Awesome. Mark?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Mark Kester. I'm also one of the co-founders there with Jason at Global Scout. By way of background, a Navy veteran, while in uniform, most of my time was as an intelligence professional. Been out in the private sector starting tomorrow, 6 years. Right when I got out, retired, went overseas, stood up and ran a data analytics open source center in the Middle East, where we really got introduced to the power of big data, open source intelligence, data platforms, the great opportunities, but also the great challenges. And, came back about 3 years ago and been in consulting, and then Jason and I have been running here at Global Scout, just coming up on a year. Outside of that, I'm very fortunate to serve as a director on a nonprofit called Saddles and Service, where we're treating active duty veterans or first responders in their battle against PTSD using equine assisted learning activities. So great to join you all this morning. Really look forward to our discussions.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And just to kind of kick it off before I hand it over to Alessandra, when we were talking with Global Scout, really, I guess a few months ago now, we really wanted to be able to highlight for folks the fact that Prospector has completely neutral data. All of the data on our platform comes from companies' public disclosure documents, and we don't provide any analysis or interpretation. But of course, there are great firms out there and companies like Global Scout that can help with a deeper dive onto things like geopolitical risk or due diligence. So we wanted to figure out a way to kind of complement our data with some deeper dive analysis into areas that Prospector doesn't focus on. And so we were like, what countries should we kind of maybe look at first? And I'd had a few conversations with a few different mining executives talking about what was going on in Colombia right around that time. So that's really how we decided to kind of check this out and do a country report focused with Global Scout. So again, would love to hear everybody's thoughts on the report after you hear the talk today and have a chance to read through it. And I would also ask if you've got other countries that you want us to focus on next, throw those in the chat. Because we are looking at where we want to focus on next for another country report to do kind of the same thing. So if you've got a country you're really wondering about or you're following along with, please let us know or shoot us a message so we can make sure to include that in our list. And with that, Alessandra, I will hand it over to you.
All right. So to put you into context about the mining industry in Colombia before we hear all the insight of what is happening on the investment environment for the mining projects in Colombia, I would like to share with you some insights about the main commodities, the most important players, and at the same time, I'll give you some tricks on how to navigate on Prospector and find the same data that I'm going to share with all of you. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, if I do it correctly. All right, so give me just a sec. All right, perfect, I'm ready to start. So we have about 110 publicly disclosed projects in Colombia. You can find this information just by filter out on the Prospector portal by Colombia. We identified 110 publicly disclosed projects. As we know, the main minerals that are traded in Colombia are mostly coal, gold, silver, emeralds, copper. However, they also have boric oxide, they have nickel, and they have some uranium between other minerals. When we hear about Colombia, about coal, they have a long history, 5.9 billion tons of coal in resources. We are mostly talking about thermal coal. So to understand what we are going to share is we are going to share information about projects that are mostly open pit, because the underground mines are mostly held by small scale companies. The middle to large size companies are mostly using the mining method of open pit. So to put into context, what is the biggest project in Colombia is Cerrejón. Cerrejón is a project with mineral resources and reserves of about 5.3 billion tons. That accounts for about 95% of the coal in Colombia. This project is owned by Glencore, and it had recently produced. Okay, so here is Cerrejón. If we click on the company on Cerrejón, we can look at the location. This project is located in La Guajira. La Guajira is by the northern east of Colombia, where most of the coal projects are located. So we can find coal projects in La Guajira or in Cesar. It's a little bit down La Guajira. Then we have that this project is owned by Glencore, have been recently acquired to 100% because that was previously owned by Anglo American. Here we can find the resources and reserves, the production. The annual production for thermal coal in the latest year have been about around 4 million tons of thermal coal. We can find that in Prospector. Here you can click it on and see what was the resource and reserve in the previous year. The same for the annual production. Another two main coal company projects in Colombia. We can find La Jagua and Calenturitas. Both projects are also owned by Glencore, but they have been on care and maintenance since, I think, since 2020 or 2021. So they have been a while on this suspended stage. Another main mineral that we can find in Colombia is copper. In copper, they have about 9 million tons at an average grade of 0.59%. Considering of all the copper projects in Colombia, they have about 20 projects. The main one will be Quebradona. I think I have it somewhere in here. Okay, yeah, Quebradona. Quebradona is a project located in Antioquia. Antioquia is here, about the center west of Colombia, where most of the silver and gold projects are located in the country. This project is owned by Anglo Gold Ashanti, and it has resources of reserve in total of about 5.7 million tons. Another projects that we can find in Colombia for copper, we have San Matias in the region of Córdoba and Roble in Chocó. All this data you can find just by filter out copper on the portal in Prospector. So another main mineral is silver. Something interesting with silver is that if we filter out silver on a primary metal basis, we can find that there are only two projects. That happens that you can do it like this. So you can click it on primary mineral, you click on or type on silver, you can find that there are two projects. There are two projects, Santana and Zancudo, because most of the silver production is produced as a byproduct. Then we just unclick that so we can see the full spectrum of projects that produce silver in Colombia. The total resources and reserve of silver in Colombia are about 300 million ounces. And the main project is Quebradona that I showed you before in the copper, because they produce silver as a byproduct, and they are still being the biggest resources and reserves of silver. They have about 121 million ounces, and they are located in Antioquia. As I mentioned, this is where the silver and the gold is located. If you're interested in looking for those projects, you need to look and try to go into that area. So in general terms, where can you find the silver? In Antioquia, in Tolima. Those are the regions that are in between the center to the center east of Colombia. So if we talk finally about emeralds, there is a big project called Cosquest Emerald Mine. Yeah, something interesting about the emeralds in Colombia is that they are a lighter color than the emeralds that you find all over the world. That's some fact that I read recently. It was super interesting. This is a mining that is still on production and construction. This is owned by Fura Gems. The total resources and reserves of emeralds is about 6 million carats. Most of them correspond to this project. The grade of the emeralds is about 2 carats per ton. So here you can see the same as I was mentioned, the 6 million carats. You can find it on the Prospector portal. So in general terms, what I show you is that there is some really good projects that are on located in Colombia. Not all of them are in production. There are a few that are still at the permitting or study phases. I'll say not most of the project, but at least most of the projects, if we're talking about gold and silver, because coal is the most ancient industry in Colombia in terms of commodity. So what I have shown you is that first, when you land on Prospector portal, you can filter out by Colombia, see all the projects in Colombia. And if you are interested in a particular mineral, you can go and search, as we did with the silver. We can go and search for the primary mineral, or if they produce the mineral, although it's not a primary. Then I show you information about all, not focusing on projects that have recently released a report, but of all the projects. Because there are some projects that are still in a suspended stage. So I wanted to show all the potential in Colombia. Then you can filter out by stage if you are interested in projects that are in a very early stage, such as grassroots or target drilling or discovery delineation. Or if you want the studies or something farther than the studies, this is a production mine, you can filter out in here by production. Once you are in here, you are going to be able to see the page of the company, as I show you with La Guajira. You can see the location, the owners, the resources and reserves, the production. For companies that report the annual production cost, you're going to be able to see the cost and be able to compare between projects and make your own analysis and your own conclusions. As Emily mentioned, we are not going to give you the magic formula or our ideas. We want you to give you all the data you need to take your own decisions, to make your own decisions. So and with all this information, once we land to this page, we can easily create a list of projects. As Emily mentioned, I have already created for you a list of projects in Colombia, but it's easy to do. You will just select the filters that you think are most important. You are going to click on the projects that you want to add to your list and create a list. Something like this. Here, I didn't make a distinction between a stage or projects. I just added the whole list of projects in Colombia. However, you can customize your list with everything that you need. For example, I'll suggest do it for commodity, because it's different to follow up or make a comparison for gold projects comparing to gold and silver projects, but that will depend completely on you. We're going to give you all the tools to do your analysis. I'll give you some insight. Remember to download our Colombia report if you want to get more figures or you're interested in our commodities, and also if you want to read these great insights about the investment environment in Colombia. So I think that will be all from my side. I'll just pass the ball, and
Thanks, Alessandra.
I'm going to hear all these.
Yeah, and just a reminder to everybody, if you've got questions, and it can be on anything, the content in the data, the companies and the commodities Alessandra talked about, or how to find it on Prospector, just throw those questions in the Q&A section. And now we're going to hand it over to the Global Scout guys. So Jason and Mark, over to you.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Emily. Really appreciate it. Jason and I are really looking forward to walking through our section of the report. Alessandro, a really great run through. And, it's Emily, you and I have talked, right? I've been in the kind of the open source intelligence, the data platform. And I'd say this publicly, I love the platform, the user interface that you guys have. It's intuitive, it's easy to use. It really, for users out there, they can quickly get the data. And it is all about the data, the right data. And, you guys have focused in on making sure you have the right data, because I can tell you, I've seen other efforts where they have too much data, and it's too bad, and you can't get those unique insights. So it's great to see a platform that gives you unique insights. And kind of what Jason and I want to talk to everyone about is, that's a great foundation as you're looking for investment opportunities, or you're looking to, you're thinking about operations in other countries. And what we try to do at Global Scout is we try to identify what are your information and your intelligence requirements. We call them priority business intelligence requirements. What's the critical intelligence information you need to move on an opportunity, avoid strategic failure, or manage one's current operations? And I kind of just want to give you a little backdrop of how we approach this before we dive into the report. And I think it's important to lay this background in. I think everyone on this, especially since we have a global audience, is aware of we're in a very dynamic world right now. If you look at recent years here, the big impacts of COVID, Russia invading Ukraine, the Israel-Hamas conflict, you see business operations, on top of civilian populations being disrupted, business operations being severely disrupted. I mean, I don't think anyone probably understands the Houthis, but the Houthis right now are impacting shipping in the Red Sea, and that's going to have an impact on a lot of industries there that are maybe have to bypass the Suez Canal, put additional security out there, and that has an impact on business operations. And as you look forward, one of the recent discussions we have is Taiwan elections, 13 January, right? If that trends towards DPP getting, reelected, William Lai going in there, does that create tension in that area there, and disrupt business operations that are connected to that region? You have economic uncertainty, and which is actually probably good for this industry, the mining industry. If you look at gold, the store of value, the demand for gold has increased because more banks want it. But that has an impact. And technological change is, the proliferation of computing power, 5G, AI, which obviously you use with your platform, Emily, right? In drawing on that, you're getting those efficiencies out there. And last and not least is the information environment, which we'll talk about how populations, we hear it a lot here in the US around elections, but it affects the local populace out in rural areas. How are they being influenced, and what could that be out there? So those are the environment that we're in. And so what we go about is we sit down and we talk to clients and say, okay, we try to draw out what are your top information intelligence requirements, and then how do we go about satisfying. So that's kind of the approach. We didn't talk to anyone for this report. We kind of approach and say, okay, at a 30,000 foot level, so we kind of like to make the reference to kind of high up. What are the key considerations we think those that are looking to potentially go into Colombia, what would they focus in on? And so the three areas that we're going to talk about here is the political outlook, safety and security, and then ESG. And we'll touch upon about some of those key areas in relation to Colombia. So I'm going to screen share here. Hopefully I do successfully. And so okay, and hopefully you guys are seeing, you're seeing the report, right? So I kind of want to draw you in, and you can, people in the chat can feel free to make comments about my highlighting. I draw upon my days as an EA and a chief of staff. And I think it's important. All the words, in this report are critical, but I try to draw out the key ones. And by way of background, right? Jason and I are not subject matter experts on every issue going on in the globe. Okay. And this is one thing we identify at Global Scout. We do believe we have the ability to ask the right questions, and we have a great network of Global Scout contributors, analysts that we compare in. And so on this report, I am filling in for our lead analyst who wrote this report, Rachel, who has deep, extensive knowledge of the region, also has a degree in geology, travels. Unfortunately, she had to travel down into the region today, and she couldn't be here. And so that's what we feel very comfortable is somebody approaches us with a subject like Emily and her team did. Hey, we do actually have the right expertise for Colombia, and we do think we can give you value added. The atmospherics, report is atmospherics on what you want to think about if you're considering going into Colombia. So I'll start off here with just kind of the basic country background, and what I highlight in green is kind of the key takeaways in there, and Alessandro covered it very well. Hey, Colombia is rich in natural resources. That's why we're talking about it, right? If it wasn't, then it might not be a great opportunity. And while there's a lot of dynamics in there, it's a very favorable environment at most times. I think the biggest concern one might want consider is the armed criminal organizations, the groups that exist there on the ground, especially where they operate, because they operate in areas that probably mining industry obviously right now faces. But if you wanted to get in there, you need to be aware, and we'll talk about more as we go into the report. So kind of drawing upon the political environment, some of the key things I kind of want to note in there is that it's a generally favorable investment environment, stable institutions, they have peaceful transfers of power. You have President Petro in there, who was elected last year, first left-wing liberal president the country has seen. And as one would expect, he has initiatives, the stuff he campaigned on. And some of the areas that would draw your attention to is, where he's focused in on his green transition, potential reforms on the, taxes, and maybe limiting corporate tax breaks, trying to be more compliant with ESG requirements. So these are things that would catch your attention as you look at the political environment here. And as we, progress through the report, the things that really stood out as I kind of, we worked with Rachel in there is kind of where is it focused in and on the mining industry. And, where is this transition? Where are there concerns that one might have? And I think open pit coal mining projects is the first, right? They're talking about a ban on that, potentially limiting concessions for exploration. But, with every great initiative, especially when you want to go in another direction, in a democratic society, the opposition could raise concerns. And I think one of the things that's notable about this country is that the presidents, can't run for re-election. So one of the assessments, the lines in there that Rachel put in there is that, hey, many of these policies or initiatives could be reversed on the next election. And we'll talk a little bit more as we kind of see what's happened here recently with local elections. I kind of, move on. The biggest, concern that jumped out to me right here is, as you're looking at what Petro and his government's doing, they're facing some opposition, is that they are working on a new mining law. And it is focused on, small scale mining, mainly. I think they, want to put more emphasis there. But what I highlighted here in green is that, it's our assessment is that while it could improve an investment environment for the mining sector in the long run, your short-term companies could face some bureaucratic hurdles as these policies are implemented. And this is an area that, we would talk about as you're doing due diligence or indications and warning. You're watching the political environment, you're seeing how long, kind of the support Petro has in government, is where are they with this proposal, and what actually is the language within that mining law, what's the implications for your specific type of business. If you're looking to get in there, whether you're an investor in mining. So that's an area I kind of highlight. That's why I put, hey, this is something to watch closely. We would, use call indications and warnings, stuff you want to track closely. Now, countries had some significant political unrest, and even recently here in the last couple of years. But the unrest, especially in the urban areas, has slowed down. And really, what you have to understand is, if you're looking from the outside, if you're not there down in the region, you're not connected to the local news, you're probably only going to get a snapshot of it, especially from Western media, unless something happens big in one of the major cities. You might not get it. So what you have to focus in on, and the concern is, it could happen down there in the local area, and it has. And that's really where, as you talk about how you think about it, you really have to have good information, good intelligence in the specific area you're looking at. And it's a combination of, hey, what's available out there and publicly available information, but also to people on the ground that can give you the what we'd like to say, the ground truth. From an intelligence perspective, we call it all source analysis. What I want to kind of really focus in on next is the safety and security. And, look at this from two perspectives. The country's got a lot safer to travel to if you're in the urban areas, right? The major crime is just petty crime. from all indications. Even high casualty bombs in urban areas, which people obviously know firsthand or have heard of. It's a largely thing of the past. But the area that we want to focus in is on the rural areas. That's where your operations are. And you have to think about it from a business perspective of, okay, I have staff, I have employees, we need to transit from supply routes. Are they going to be disrupted? And that's where we really tried to draw upon in this report as you move forward. And we talk about the players. There's 3 major groups in here. I'm not going to go into great detail about them. I think most are familiar with the FARC. Now you're just looking at the dissident groups. You have the CDG and the ELN. And you can see here a great graphic of kind of where their areas that they operate within Colombia. And what I would draw you upon is, I'm going to bounce here to this graphic, is kind of when you overlay it and you look at it, this graphic over here, kind of where Alessandro laid out, kind of where the operations are, you get a better perspective of like, okay, they're operating in the same space. And this is a graphic that's a little bit later in the report where the illicit mining is. So you need to know the operating environment that's down there, where these groups are and their impact. Let me shift back here to the other one. Hold on a second. Okay. And so you have these groups, ELN, FARC, CDG, and the key point here is all 3 are armed and active throughout the rural departments, posing a risk to the companies in these areas, and something you need to be aware of. And we talk about each group specifically, areas that they're focused in. Look, they're in a lot of illegal activities. There's overlap from their distribution, narcotics, human trafficking, they use the same, rat lines, we like to say, to get stuff out. I think what's important to note is, and I heard here recently in a podcast, coca is down. And so the margins in the narcotic traffic are down. And that's why they've moved into the illicit mining, because the margins are better, especially if you're going after the gold. And there's a growing number of illicit mines in this region. So I think as you look at this and the impact, you have to seriously consider, what are worst case scenarios. And I think I draw your attention to this page here, is that where, the CDG impacted the Chinese Bertika mine and significantly impacted them. And then also too, I think here too, it is of concern because you're going to have to figure out to work with the criminal leadership there. I think this line highlighted here may be forced to enter into informal groups, informal agreements with local criminal leadership to make sure they don't disrupt your operations. Okay, so you have the armed groups that present a threat, but you also have some other factors you need to take in, and that's landmines, which are very prevalent there. Interesting to me, I think the second highest number after Afghanistan. So having somebody on the ground knowledge of exactly where to go and where not. If you're down there doing exploration, you're going down, try to have meetings, make sure you have a local, you have somebody that knows exactly where it's safe to go, drive, step. It's just a factor in these environments. And while a lot of effort's been put towards demining, still a lot remains to be done. And then paro armado, which, for Westerners are strikes, labor strikes, but they are driven by these armed groups, the ELN, CDG, and they can disrupt your operations. And so while they might not necessarily be targeting your mining company, it might be going after something that they want to protest against the government. It does have an impact to operations. So in this section, I think it's, there's the security aspect, but then there's also the disruption. And those are, serious considerations that one needs to take. And really, you have to have deep subject matter expertise in a particular department, the actors on the ground, what's influenced them, how do they get their information, who are key leaders that, you would need to engage And then how is information controlled, and what gets the locals all fired up? I kind of, before I pass it to Jason, is that, for the ESG section, is that, it is a favorable investment environment for all purposes. There are some trends here that politically of concern you need to track and monitor, but you go with the track record and the importance of this industry, it probably will remain a favorable investment environment. Your biggest concern is the safety and security of your operations. And at that, I'll just pause to see if I can answer any questions before I pass it to Jason.
I think we got one kind of a two-part question from Fernando. Where do you find information about the social issues or the conditions of contracts with the government? And he gave the example of Cobra Panama. So I don't know if you want to dive into that now, Mark, or after Jason chats.
I mean, Jason, you want to talk contracts? I could talk social issues.
Sure. Yeah, I can dive into that a little bit. It's maybe even a good segue to hit the ESG part here, and I'll preface ESG in the way that we think about, a lot of companies think about ESG as a box checking exercise, and I tend to think that that's a short-sighted way to think about it. I come from an economics background as an undergrad, and then international security in my master's, and the reason I like those two pieces is economics, there's only one answer: it depends. So that's the right answer to every paper that you ever write. And then with international security, it's all about trade-offs, and that's how you have to think about the ESG environment in Colombia, and then globally as well. And so I'll make a couple points on that. Colombia is full of some paradoxes. On the one hand, there's a big emphasis on the green transition. There's opportunity for green metals. The actual domestic power consumption, energy consumption, things like that is a pretty good mix. It's relatively sustainable compared to some other places you might have mines. On the other hand, they're exporting a lot of thermal coal, like Alessandro was talking about. So it's depends what your question is on ESG when you want to become an investor. And I think when you're talking about some of these individual mining sites, to Mark your points, it's about getting down into individual companies, local situations, and what's happening on the ground. I also think when we talk about those paradoxes, as you talked about, Mark, there's a huge kind of potential regulatory shift going on in the country right now. There's an ideological transition that came in with the Petro government. There's recent elections locally, which were not a presidential election, but these local elections were seen as a referendum on that national election, and will impact Petro's policies moving forward. There's no kind of guarantee whether or not you're going to maintain kind of ideological consistency at the national level there. But what you have seen is very intentional effort to increase integration of the informal sector, to reduce some environmental damage and things like that. And that all sounds great, right? But you also have these trade-offs that go along with that. So you may be trying to reduce mercury usage. You may be trying to integrate the informal sector, but those things can be more difficult. And as they're looking at doing some of the environmental impact assessments and some of these sort of regulations, some of the disclosures, that can become onerous. That can put pressure on some local miners. It's difficult to transition from an informal sector into something formal when the burden to entry becomes a little bit higher, if that makes sense. I think to the question we had about where do you find data on these types of things, I think it's twofold. You've got the EITI standards, which are about disclosure and about transparency, and especially with regard to sharing data with local communities and so forth and so on. That's good for international investors because there's more data potentially available there. It doesn't necessarily always translate to an impact on the ground because you're still dealing with a data literacy and kind of understanding and access to the data. That makes sense. Just because it's out there and available doesn't mean that it's making an impact there locally. That's an opportunity for individual companies to engage with local communities and interpret the data together and things like that. So there is some more data available on that side. What I would say is, though, that there's still a lot of mistrust at the national level. There's some misgivings between local stakeholders and the national government, even if they like where they say the reforms are going, it doesn't necessarily mean that the execution is going to be there. And a lot of these areas, as Mark touched on, there's competing control with the government. There's other actors that provide a modicum of security and kind of regulation, even if that's informal regulation there. So it's a complicated piece. And so the point that I want to draw out there is generating social license. If you just go down at the box checking level, your buy-in from a local community isn't necessarily going to be there. And I think the most successful companies are going to be the ones that treat ESG and treat social license as an intelligence problem, the same way that you treat security and political risk and monitoring regulations and things like that. Because a lot of it, it depends, it's qualitative and so forth and so on, but getting that deep understanding. And I think Colombia is not necessarily unique in this way, but that deep understanding what the local issues are, who are the local opinion leaders, how are they going to react? It's not just kind of a feel-good thing that you put on the glossy slick sheet on your mining promo. It translates into real operational frictions. There's line items there. There's potential disruptions that go along with that. There's time spent mediating disputes, and a lot of that can be dealt with a little bit more efficiently if your local intel is better. And so to answer the question about that, I would always say it's a lot about having local kind of feet on the ground, people that can walk the area locally, in addition to the disclosures that are now being mandated there. So I'll tie that off there. There's a lot more you can access in the report, but I think maybe that's a good place to take questions there, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely. And so everybody, if you want to start dropping your Q&As in there, I've got a few teed up here. We spoke to Fernando's already, and then wanted to talk, going back, Alessandra, to some of the data on Prospector. Like, how does Colombia compare to other neighboring countries or regional area, the kind of regional area, in terms of the amount of mining investment and activity? Would you say it's like a kind of a leading country in the region, or how would you kind of frame that regionally?
I would say that Colombia is an important player, especially if we talk about coal, because there are not a lot of coal mines in Latin America. And we have seen the reserves of just one of their mines is amazing. It's very impressive. However, there are other countries that have developed more the other commodities, such as the gold, copper, or silver, especially Chile, or the iron in Brazil, even the same Peru, and other countries have developed more their industry. I remember talking with one of the manager of a mining company in Colombia, and they were talking before Petro that they wanted to switch into gold and push that in that commodity, since we know that we are in a process of decarbonization, or we are in the process of not using that much gold and switching to renewable energy. Something that I don't think is going to happen in the next 10 years. It's going to take a process to be able to sustain everything that the coal sustains with renewable energy. But I know that was the trend. But in terms of, we talked about taxation or other things in fiscal or investment environment, besides what we already have heard. In terms, they have competitive taxes. If we are talking about Latin America, I think that some countries in Latin America have a much greater tax rate if we compare it to our countries around the world. So I would say they are competitive. They have a bunch of resources and reserves, some of them underdeveloped. So they will make a potential big player in the mining industry in Latin America. However, they remind me, when I was reading through the report, it reminded me of Peru a few years ago, when we were dealing with the terrorists on the areas in which the mining projects were located. That's something that they need to deal with before getting into getting more, or getting at this competitive position comparing to Latin America. Those are some things that they'll need to deal. And also, and as we heard during the presentation of Global Scout, we know that for unfortunately, the president does not have the support of the country anymore. So that make it even more difficult for them to assume this or to take the decisions that he wanted to make. To be talking about the case in Peru, we had a president that tried to do exactly the same things, limit the mining production and try to favor the small or even the illegal mining. And it didn't go well because they didn't have the support of the Congress. So I don't think there is going to be much of a progress in Colombia if we compare it to Peru.
Yeah, and I guess that tees up another question, which is, are there specific geopolitical or local issues that are specifically important for mining investors to keep an eye on, right, in Colombia and the region, like this issue of artisanal mining? Jason and Mark, are there things specific to a mining investment that you think like, hey, you better keep an eye on this?
Yeah, I think, as Rachel highlighted in the report is, where exactly on the ground? Is it close to indigenous people, protected land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what kind of operations, I think there was highlighted in there, kind of, what type of operations you're running in there and, the impact to the locals from that. And I think each group has their own issues on it. And, some are probably more vocal than others, like I say, all politics are local. I think that truly is in these situations in there. Jason, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's some big picture kind of macro things I think are worth considering, and how they manifest at each individual site is something for kind of a deeper kind of a custom analysis, if that makes sense. But I think one of the big things that's emerging that's starting to catch some headlines in the press now is the conflict between Venezuela and Guyana on the territorial dispute there. That seems like that could be kind of remote from Colombia, but given the amount of cross-border kind of trade and interaction and the security dynamics between Venezuela and Colombia, there's an opportunity right now for that to go potentially either way. You've seen the U.S. begin to relax some sanctions against Venezuela. There's some mutual reasons why that's coming to pass. That's going to have a big impact on Colombia one way or the other. That can be in terms of electricity and things like that. Also, security dynamics. So I'll just kind of leave it, I guess, at that without getting into great detail there. I think another thing to watch is you see over some movement of instability. We're used to look at Ecuador and parts of Ecuador as being relatively stable, relatively safe. Some ports there, like Guayaquil, are becoming quite unstable. They're becoming quite infiltrated with organized crime and things like that as certain illegal operations move that way. How that impacts Colombia, I think, is an interesting thing to watch as well. Does that change shipping routes? Does that have spillover effects in the region? So I think that's important to monitor. Peru is always interesting. The politics there, I think, suffice to say, are fascinating. So I think that within the area that's important. And then I think we're looking globally, right? I mean, what is happening in terms of sourcing from Asia, sourcing from Africa, and we're looking at different supply lines, right? Can you source? Do you want to be sourcing from somewhere that has to transit Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal? Do you want to source from something that has to transit the Malaccan Straits and other choke points out there? And at some level, do you still have to do that because, what is the refining and kind of local processing capacity there? But I think there's a great desire, especially in the North American market, to source things that are closer to home. And I think there's a desire in the North American market also for greater, ESG transparency and things like that. And I think that's an opportunity in Colombia, but it's not something that's kind of an easy linear trend line right now, if that makes sense.
I think that drives home also, folks, I think, sometimes think that once they invest in a country or take a look at a country that they've got the picture, and everything is constantly changing, right? And so it's really important also to not assume that we understand what's going on at any given point, and that's where the process stops. And that's where I would encourage folks, if you're kind of engaging in a due diligence process, that it doesn't just stop once you've made an investment, right? That there really is kind of like ongoing due diligence and monitoring of everything going on in any jurisdiction. That goes for Nevada and Ontario the same way it goes for, Colombia. And I know that's something that Jason and Mark, you all and the Global Scout team can help folks with if they're looking for on the ground truth due diligence work as well.
Yeah. Emily, and it's a great, one area I forgot to mention, and kind of we didn't write about in the report, but like I think your point is well said, because I'll throw the China factor. Okay. Their amount of investment that they've put into this country, their increasing partnership, second largest trading partner. They obviously have mines in there, but they're investing in infrastructure. Okay. And how might that infrastructure impact your operations? They're putting 5G, I believe, in there, right? And so, whether Huawei, ZTE, right? Is there concern? Do you have concern with that? Where in the supply chain might they have a hand in it, and it has an impact to you, and where you might not have that competitive advantage against them? So I just, like you said, it's as we talk to several clients who are looking at global operations, we always talk about China. Like, what impact they're having, because they're very aggressive moving out into areas, and it's a great race for these natural resources for a lot of reasons. And so I would throw that in there. We didn't touch upon it, but you want to be aware of it and be aware that they're in that space and operating very aggressively.
Yeah, and even in markets where China isn't proactively looking to buy up assets and influence infrastructure, because they are still such like the largest consumer of many of these commodities globally, right? They are the customer. So they have huge influence, even just from that perspective, right? The level of their demand and commodity prices can impact a lot of these issues, even if there's not a direct kind of desire to influence stuff locally. So that's a great point. Well, with that, we've got about 4 minutes left. So if anybody's got any last questions, please shoot them in. And just to recap, again, you can get the report and sign up for a trial at prospectorportal.com. And I will throw my email in here as well. And everybody else, if you want to also, in that way, if you've got questions for any of the folks on the call today, you want to be connected directly with Alessandra, Jason, or Mark, let me know, or they can drop their email in there too. And we look forward to staying in touch and hearing what you all think. And yeah, please let us know if you've got any questions.
Emily, I will say on behalf of Mark and I, it's been a real pleasure working with the team. There's a lot of folks that went into making this happen that aren't on the webinar today. So to the whole team, it was great. It's fantastic working with you guys. We, no paid promo here, right? Like, we really think you have a great product and a great team there. So I just want to say thanks to that. And maybe, if folks are looking to comment in the chat, we'd love to have suggestions on where else, people would like to be looking for follow-on reports.
Absolutely. Yeah. So don't forget to drop that in, folks that are on. And we'll also throw that up on a LinkedIn poll as well, if any of you guys are super active on there.